It's that time of year once again, so I've got my favorite Christmas sweater, a mug of hot chocolate, and the desire to feel something other than the creeping dread of America potentially barreling toward its series finale. And what better way is there to get into the Christmas spirit than to watch a baby get dropped off of a building and then immediately saved by God? Except I'm lying. And not about the baby getting dropped off the building, that does actually happen in this movie. No, I'm lying about getting into the Christmas spirit because, in all honesty, the Christmas through line for this movie, which I may or may not touch on at some point in this video, is honestly the least interesting thing about the movie. The movie in question is Tokyo Godfathers, a 2003 animated film that Zoran has been begging me to watch for years, but I just kept forgetting to. So this overdue video is for you, buddy. Instead of giving you a plot summary, which would otherwise be easy to do, I want to take today to look at the three main characters and their personal arcs. Because Christmas stuff aside, that's what really drives everything else in this glorified baby escort quest. But before we dive in, as always, we gotta give a huge shout out to the wonderful people who continue to support the channel via Patreon. With a special shout out to Celestial tier members Brendan Carlson, Stephen PD101, This One Snack, Totally Reasonable Curb, and Trey Hardy. If you'd like to support the channel, consider heading on over to Patreon, and don't forget that this is the last week to get 50% off your first month in the Celestial tier. But if you can't, a like and subscribe both go a very long way in helping out small channels like mine. Also, with the help of channel artist Uka, we've started doing postcards for patrons of every tier. Naturally, we decided to kick things off with a nice little Christmas card. I'll throw it up on screen beside me just in case you can't see it all the well, because I can see that there's a glare in my camera. But as a new incentive, we'll be doing these regularly, and I'll be handwriting notes on the back of them. So if you'd like one for yourself and want all of the cards to come, make sure you follow the link in the description or the pinned comment. Once the new year begins, this card will go away and we'll begin working on the next set, so if you want this particular Christmas card, you've got about a week or so. Thanks again to Uka for knocking the artwork out of the park as she usually does. I provided a link to her social media in the description and pinned comment in case you want to get some art made for yourself. And with that out of the way, let's get on to today's topic, but first I'm going to put my cup down because it is heavy and I have not been drinking it, so my hot chocolate is now cold. So I do want to say that this is a good movie and I do think you should watch it. It's only about 90 minutes long, so you can knock that out in an early afternoon if you just got nothing else to do. I say that to say that there will be a healthy amount of spoilers for Tokyo Godfathers in this video, and I will also be skipping over events that aren't necessarily relevant to the chunks I want to speak about. And even if I do speak on some of the less relevant bits, it will certainly not be in chronological order. Now, very basically, the premise of the movie is, on Christmas night, three homeless people find a baby abandoned among piles of trash. Are you feeling the Christmas spirit yet? After some plotting, the trio sets out on a journey to return the infant to its rightful parents, but also get answers as to why the baby was abandoned in the first place. If that sounds interesting to you, go give the movie a watch and then come back. And if you do go watch the movie and come back, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. It's important for you to know the basic premise because all of the characterization of our main trio stems from their interaction with the foundling and how that causes them to reflect on their own failures, shortcomings, and regrets. We're going to start with probably the least interesting of the trio, at least from my perspective, being the runaway Miyuki. She's your standard, cantankerous teenager that feels things very deeply the way teenagers are known to do, and she has a combative or snappy response for just about everything. It doesn't do much to endear her to the audience, but just like with people who behave this way in real life, it serves as a defense for those very same feelings that she's not really sure how to process. Miyuki's story revolves around the fact that she ran away from home after stabbing her father over a cat. Her father, who is also a police officer. But she also does this because she just generally feels as though she goes unheard. So out of a mixture of shame for her actions and the fear of consequences to come, she runs away. It's brought up several times during the film that unlike the other two characters, she has a place to go back to and there are people who care about her waiting for her to come home. The first time we see this in action is on a crowded train where two passing cars line up in just a way that Miyuki ends up face to face with her father on the opposite train. It's very clear that he's not only surprised to see her, but that he's desperately trying to communicate with her. We can even see in this scene that he's wearing a scarf she made for him, the same scarf we see her throw at him to clean up his blood with. Just the very fact he's wearing it shows the audience, albeit via foreshadowing, that he still deeply cares about his missing daughter. Out of sheer panic, she hops out the window and runs off, forcing her friends to follow suit. Having to own up to your own mistakes is difficult on the very best of days, so I can only imagine how much harder it becomes under the veil of homelessness. While I can't say I blame her given the circumstances, Miyuki does spend a considerable amount of time complaining about the baby in their care. But those complaints, over time, morph into self-reflection as the film goes on. Miyuki is consistently giving her peers a hard time, but through the many bizarre events that take place over the course of the runtime, she does come to understand that she views them as her family. Her attitude regarding the people around her is reshaped by the feelings about her biological family as the thoughts weigh on her more and more. There's even a moment where another character, Hana, mentions the tie between parents and children, which causes Miyuki to go call her parents. However, she freezes up after hearing her father's voice. You'd think he'd be pissed about, being stabbed, but he realizes it's his daughter and hopes she's safe, essentially pleading for her to come back home. We even see that he'd put out an ad in the local newspaper specifically aimed at her with a message only she would understand, trying to let her know she was missed and to please come home. Unfortunately, she hangs up before any real conversation could be had and immediately breaks down, apologizing repeatedly for what she'd done. So we know a big factor in her keeping her distance is just flat out guilt. As I'm sure many of you know, guilt is a powerful emotion that can choke someone into silence or inaction. These emotions are built up for us to see, as not even that far removed from this scene is another where, despite a language barrier between Miyuki and a woman speaking Spanish, Miyuki has a breakdown while reminiscing about her family. It can be easy to be on the outside looking in and just tell yourself, well, I would just go home. And that very well may be true for you, but everyone processes their emotions in ways that are unique to them. I can't say I wouldn't also feel some reluctance going home because of the mere uncertainty of what, if any, consequences might be waiting for me. At the same time, having to confront someone that you've openly hurt is hardly an easy task. All of that on top of the fact that you would have to admit that you spent your time homeless. She's also still a child, so she's not even looking at the situation in terms of what's best for her long term. Now, my biggest issue with Miyuki's personal story arc is that we as the audience are kind of robbed of the emotional payoff to it. At the very end of the film, after all of the shenanigans have concluded, she comes face to face with her father through pure happenstance. And we're not shown how this plays out, which really bugged me. We can assume through the struggle she's faced in this movie, as well as her growth as a person over the course of it, that this conversation likely played out well for both parties involved. But after a full movie of watching her arc unfold, I wanted to see this interaction. But instead, we roll credits. But let's move on to the next of our primary trio, Gin. His story arc is interesting to see unfold because, like Miyuki, he starts the film as an unlikable, if somewhat level-headed person. He's definitely got some questionable behaviors that'll leave a bad taste in your mouth, but it's clear that he's the one that has the best sense of how society sees homeless people. And his narrative also continues the theme of family and consequence. Shortly after finding the baby, the third of the trio, Hana, decides to name the foundling Kyoko. Gin gets flustered by the name, and we find out later that he reacts this way because Kyoko was also his daughter's name. You see, Gin tells Hana, and by proxy the audience, not long after the scene, that he once had a family of his own. However, misfortune befell his family and his daughter became gravely ill. With medical bills stacking up, he desperately needed to find a way to make a significant amount of money quickly, which led to a race where Gin was convinced by someone to participate in a scheme that would presumably yield the winnings he needed. Unfortunately, their scheme was discovered, he was kicked out of the race altogether, and ultimately his daughter ended up succumbing to her illness. After that, Gin lost the motivation to work, and it wasn't long before his wife passed away too. It's an incredibly bleak story that helps the audience connect to Gin through his past suffering. Except that was all a fucking lie! We find out near the movie's conclusion that Gin's daughter and his wife are both alive. Turns out he wasn't a bike racer, he was a bike shop owner who was constantly down at the tracks running up gambling debts. Once the debt got too high, instead of coming clean to his family and facing his mistakes, he essentially did what Miyuki did and ran away to hide. And just like Miyuki's father, Gin's family spent time looking for him. They even, depressingly so, checked unidentified corpses in the hopes of finding him. Gin's entire point for telling the story the way he did is so that he could garner sympathy for how his life ended up the way it did. It's easier to have a softer opinion of someone whose life spiraled out of control via circumstances beyond their control. It's far more difficult to empathize with someone who destroyed their own life through their own lack of self-control. But even this isn't simply a performance. Regardless of how he spins the tale of how he got to where he is, there's still authenticity in how he interacts with others. Those moments where he's giving out advice or trying to steer Miyuki in the right direction come from a genuine place because he's had more than enough time to reflect on the choices that got him to where he is. It's why at several points in time he urges Miyuki to do what he can't and simply go home. We can also see that through Miyuki, he's trying to find his own sort of redemption. He's crude and a bit callous at times, but it's obvious he's trying to do right by her even though he failed to do right by his own daughter. There's even a moment toward the beginning when he's telling his sob story where two other presumably homeless men stumble across Miyuki. They basically tell her to scram because they don't want problems with Gin, saying she's his little princess. It's one of our earliest hints that he sees her as a stand-in for the daughter he assumes he'll never get a chance to see again. His story arc concludes with him reconnecting with his biological daughter, which was honestly pretty nice to see. You know, despite him being a liar. But that leaves us with the last of the three, Hana. Arguably the most interesting and the most tragic by a country mile. Hana is a trans woman who spends most of her time in the film trying to be a beacon of positivity or at the very least, hope. Despite her circumstances, she's constantly looking for reasons to be happy or being grateful for what little she does have. Immediately after finding the abandoned baby, Hana sees the situation as an opportunity despite getting Miyuki's reactions. Hana spends most of the movie having to passively reinforce her identity even to her own friends. And the sudden presence of this child gives her an opportunity to be a mother. She even says as much. She's initially reluctant to give up the child as Gin suggests, but then decides that not only will she find and return the child to its parents, but she's also going to make them answer for abandoning the child in the first place. What makes Hana's particular arc more tragic than her peers is the implied trajectory of her life. We find out that in the not too distant past, Hana was happily married, but unlike Gin's wife, her husband actually did die after slipping in the bathtub. We also find out that she was once a performer in a small club where she presumably met her husband, and she's even questioned by the owner of the place why she didn't simply come back when things went wrong. Hana had caused a bit of a ruckus with the patron after he continuously harassed her during one of her performances. Naturally, that harassment was specifically an attack on her identity. She never went back because she couldn't face everyone after having caused such a scene. But unlike Gin and Miyuki, it's clear that Hana doesn't look back on this place with despair or regret. She instead happily reminisces about the good times she had in that place. Hana knows that she could go back at any time, but she's blazing her own path forward in her own way. However, Hana's story takes a turn when she collapses in the street and has to be rushed to the hospital. We're not told explicitly during Gin's conversation with the attending doctor, but it's implied earlier in the film what the cause may be. After bringing up her husband's death, the club owner asks Hana if he died of AIDS. While Hana then explains the bathtub situation, it's the clue the audience needs to figure out what the deal is with her declining health. But it somehow gets even more tragic for Hana. At several points during the film, she says that people should be with their real family, more so during the holidays. It's why she's so hellbent on finding Kyoko's family, it's why she low-key encourages Miyuki to reconnect with her family, and it's why she throws Gin under the bus in front of his biological daughter in the hopes that it brings the two together after all their lost time. Hana is slowly but surely helping the people around her build the bridges they need in order to move into a happier place for the future. And it's implied towards the end that she's doing this because she's very much aware of the fact that she's dying. It's as though she's trying to prepare them for a life without her, and that's incredibly sad. But it also puts into perspective why she's so jolly and appreciative of even the tiniest of blessings and good fortune. She's trying to make the absolute most out of whatever time she has remaining, while teaching the others that family is what you make of it. Hana's story arc doesn't resolve on screen, but I don't think it was ever supposed to. It's more about the implications of her future, as well as being a very tasteful allegory for the AIDS epidemic that struck the gay and trans communities incredibly hard in the 80s and early 90s. Hana is far and away the best and most complex character in the movie. Also, yes, a baby does get dropped off a building at the end of this movie. I know that if your only interaction with this movie is listening to me talk about it, it probably feels like a Christmas movie in the same way that Die Hard feels like a Christmas movie. But one of the other narrative through lines of this movie is the idea of the Christmas miracle and how that can often be overlooked as just mere coincidence. And part of the reason I didn't go into it in this video is because it can honestly be one of the funnier aspects of this movie, so I didn't necessarily want to rob you of that if you do decide to double back and watch this, which I do recommend. There's plenty of stuff I left out for the sake of brevity, so go grab a cup of hot chocolate or eggnog and give it a go. Thanks again to Zoran for reminding me for the past 4 years to watch this film. Sorry it took so long, buddy. As always, a big shout out to these wonderful people for their continued support over on Patreon, with a special thank you to Brendan Carlson, Stephen PD101, This One Snack, Totally Reasonable Curb, and Trey Hardy. Don't forget it's your last week to get 50% off your first month in the Celestial tier with code Jupiter in case you're interested. And if you join any tier before the year ends, you can get your hands on one of these super neat Christmas cards designed by channel artist Uka. Remember to take care of yourselves and others, have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and as always, thanks for watching.